Alright everybody, let's talk about Hydroboost. The internal combustion engine is basically a large pump or air compressor. Air is constantly being drawn in through the intake into the throttle body here, and this is where the vacuum block sits. The low pressure environment inside the intake generates the vacuum that goes to power your vacuum accessories, including on a typical car, your vacuum brake booster. However, once you introduce forced induction from a turbo or a supercharger, this becomes a pressurized environment, turning your vacuum lines into pressure lines. That's not good if you're trying to use your vacuum for brakes. This monstrosity is GM's solution to that problem. This is a Power Master brake booster and master cylinder combined. The car has two brake switches, and when you depress the brakes, this huge electric motor spools up and generates your boost pressure. These things are terrible. I've had this one for only a couple years now. I got it as a deal, right? From a friend for freaking $500. They're awful. This one's already starting to leak through here right into the footwell. It's great. The problem with this thing, other than it being completely unreliable, is the fact that it's controlled by a switch. It kind of acts like a switch. It's too weak when you need it, and it's too strong when you don't need it. It makes your brakes real grabby. If you're trying to drive around in the parking lot, it'll make you look like you've never driven a car before. There are some other reasons why you might want to go with the Hydroboost besides forced induction. Consider your wheel as a Class 2 lever, with the force being applied being the friction with the road surface, and the load being your brake rotor. As you increase the diameter of your wheel, you're increasing the length of the lever arm, giving it more mechanical advantage working against your brakes. One solution to this is to increase the diameter of your brake rotor. This will allow you to have more mechanical advantage for your brakes to overcome the mechanical advantage of a larger diameter wheel. Not to mention you'll have more inertia from a heavier wheel and tire. Increasing the diameter of your brakes can get pretty expensive. So Hydroboost can be a cost-effective way to give you more clamping force on the brake to overcome this situation. Now the way this system works, so there's a pressure line coming from the power steering pump, runs under all this stuff, and enters the Hydroboost unit here. Pressurized fluid continuously flows through the unit into here and back down to the steering box. That's the return line from the steering box. This is the return line from the power booster. The return lines meet at this T junction, and then the line goes down here next to the radiator and down to the cooler. Return line comes back through this inline filter and enters the reservoir. The reservoir then feeds the pump. Even driving normally, not steering or hitting the brakes, this unit generates quite a lot of heat. So that cooler is essential. The idea initially was to use the entire 78 Cutlass booster. However, these hoses from an 84 turbocharged carbureted Regal don't fit the 78 Cutlass here and here. So what I ended up having to do was taking these pressure lines to the junkyard and trying them out on every Hydroboost vehicle I could come across until I found one that accepted both of those fittings. Here's what's left over from combining the two boosters. This is the half from the Cutlass and this is the half from the truck. Where it's hooking up to the firewall, and this piece is completely different, so I couldn't use it. All GM Hydroboost units from the 80s and 90s have the same 5-bolt pattern, so they're pretty much interchangeable. Here are the guts of the Hydroboost. Basically how this works, as you depress the brake pedal, this piston goes forward, opening up the spool valve, which sits in this hole here. As you can see, this is where the pressure line goes in, putting pressurized fluid in this hole. So as you apply the brakes, this pulls out and fills the inside of this with pressurized power steering fluid, giving you the boost by pushing back on the back of this piston here. If you go in the route I did and going with the business end of a big giant heavy duty pickup truck, The diameter of the piston is different. Everything else is essentially the same. Now, this is a non-serviceable unit, and it's held together by a rivet. I've already drilled this one out. In order to reattach the piston, you'll have to find some way to replace that rivet. Personally, I use this teeny tiny little screw and nut that was left over from a computer build. If you're going to be using junkyard parts, it's probably a good idea to get over to piratejacks.com and get you a rebuild kit, because some of them old seals will be pretty crusty. The most important seal being this right here where the piston rides. Now, inside the booster, the piston moving back and forth like this, there is a little plunger that connects the piston to the back of the master cylinder. It's critical that at rest, that plunger does not make contact. You want it close, but you don't want it to contact the inside of the master cylinder, or it'll make your brakes drag. Basically what's happening is every time you hit the brakes, the inside of the master cylinder is not coming back far enough for it to recover, and you'll constantly build up pressure until your brakes locked up. I learned that the hard way. So what you do is you space it out with washers until you find where it's just about touching, and then you know how much you have to take off the plunger to get it to work. I haven't got quite there, because taking the plunger out while it's in the car is a real pain. One problem with using the truck master cylinder is it's so long that I've had to relocate the reservoir. I'll be getting a dedicated Hydroboost reservoir like this one later, and that'll allow me to clean up this engine bay a little bit, because it will eliminate the need for this T, and it has an internal filter, so I don't have to worry about the inline one. It may also be necessary for you to upgrade your power steering pump. Personally, I had mine sent off to Sweet Manufacturing for a rebuild and upgrade. Alright folks, thanks for looking at my Hydroboost setup. All these parts are readily available at junkyards or your local parts store. I'll put the part numbers in the description so you can build your own.